Hey guys, what's going on? Today I'm going to break down Lake the Ozarks, this time for a little bit of fall bass fishing. I'm going to go over things I'm looking for, what's going to be changing, things to help you stay on top of the fish and keep you catching them. Basically, I'm going to break down the lake kind of in sections like I do in my other videos. I'm not going to go super in depth on each portion of the lake except for times when it's necessary because I have a lot to talk about in this video and I don't want it to be too long. If you want to find out more about each section of the lake and how it can fish a little bit different, I encourage you to check out my channel swing video. That video, I kind of go a little bit more in depth of each section of the lake. So without further ado, we will get right into this. And basically, fall fishing. I'm going to break this down into two parts. I'm basically going to have what I would consider a late summer, early fall pattern, and then you're going to get into a mid to late fall, even an early winter type pattern throughout the season. So as you know, fall is going to be another transitionary period. You're going to have a lot of things moving and kind of changing, and that's going to affect the fish or the way that you can find and catch the fish a little bit compared to, your summertime pattern, kind of what you've been into. So we'll start with the late summer, early fall type pattern. And basically, this time of the year, the bass are very scattered. You can catch them 25 feet deep on the main lake. You can catch them in a foot of water in the very backs, secondary points, brush piles, channel banks. The fish are kind of just strung across all over the place. They've, been out deep, a lot of them during the summer, eating shad that have been schooled up. But as people are catching them, throwing crankbaits, jigs, things like that through there, kind of breaking them up, catch and release, tournaments. The schools kind of get broken up on the main lake and dispersed a little bit. They're still there, but they can be a little bit harder to catch, or you got to search a little bit more to find a big group of them as compared to early summer. They group up a lot more and they're easier to find and easier to catch. Early on, as the temperatures are still relatively warm, say the mid to low 80s into the 70s, mid 70s, you're going to still have a thermocline basically. As long as they haven't run too much water through the dam, like if we didn't get a lot of rain, you're going to have usually a thermocline set up. If it's a very, very rainy summer, you might not really have much of a thermocline because they've been running so much water through the dam. It hasn't had a chance to set up. So with that being said, you need to keep that in mind if you're going to be fishing deeper. You need to turn up the sensitivity on your sonar and see if you can find that thermocline and be fishing structure at that level or above it. That is where the bait fish are going to be, and that's where the bass and pretty much all of the ecosystem and the life is going to be at the thermocline or above it. So one of the biggest things you're going to hear about during the fall is bait. People are going to talk about bait a lot. Shad. Basically, you have shad that have been out deep generally in summertime, and as the length of days starts to get a little bit shorter, you got water temperature cooling off a little bit, they're going to start migrating towards the back of these creeks. Now, there are a few reasons why they are migrating to the backs of these creeks, but you also need to keep in mind that they do not all migrate. There's no need to in certain circumstances. So usually around mid to late August into early September, if you start going in the backs of creeks, say like this, anywhere where there is a relatively large flat and shallow, or you have runoff coming in, you're going to start seeing an abundance of bait balls. You're going to see different sizes. They might be 1 to 2 inches, 3, 4 inches, and you're going to find some every once in a while that are going to be 6, maybe 7 inches, and those are the big gizzard shad. The reason that they are migrating is in the summer, you got your water, deep water out here, you got your thermocline, you have all your nutrients above the thermocline, you got plankton blooms, phytoplankton is what they're eating, and they're roaming around looking for areas that are rich in phytoplankton. So as the summer goes on, your things below the thermocline are actually decomposing and eating up a little bit of the oxygen, and it can kind of start to take away some of the nutrients in the water. And that's part of kind of what drives them into like coves and pockets and things to kind of get to a little bit different water. They have a little bit more nutrients. But the biggest reason is you go back to these flat areas here and you got runoff that starts to come in the fall. You usually start getting more rain. So every time it rains, you get all this new water and stuff pouring in here. Anywhere that comes in a creek channel, you're getting nutrients put into the water, and that's going to give the shad something to feed on. So they're going to go back there because that's where the nutrients are. And some bass may follow, but a lot of the times you're going to get fish that are, kind of residential that are hanging out in these areas anyway. And they just set up in areas and ambush the shad and just have a feeding frenzy on them because they're there anyway. And all the shad shows up. So it's like a buffet line for them. But another thing is in these large shallow flats, we'll just move up here, take this one as an example. You have a very, very large shallow area. So as the water temperature starts to decrease, you're not getting quite the same light intensity. The sun's not as high. It just doesn't have the same power as you get further into fall. So your phyto blooms, your algae blooms like that aren't going to be as good out in the deeper water at times. So you get back here in the real shallow areas and you get a really nice warm day in October or late September that's got, good sun, and it can warm this water up back here really, really quick and get a nice algae bloom going, and that's food for the shad. So that's basically the main reason that they're going to be migrating back in here. Now, as it starts to get a little bit cooler, you get cold fronts, water really starts to cool off. Those shad are going to start pushing back into the deeper water, either into the guts of the creeks or on channel banks. Basically just closer access to deep water that's going to be more stable. But I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more when I get to the mid to late fall, early winter type setup. So going back to the size of the shad real quick, we'll pick this as an example. So say you've been fishing this main lake point or you've been fishing this hump throughout the summer and it's been good. You've been catching fish on it consistently, it seems to be replenishing, and then you start to notice, maybe some of the shad are leaving or maybe they're staying there, but you start going to the backs of these creeks and you're going to see a lot of shad very thick, and you're thinking, man, I wonder if my fish are still going to be out here. A lot of times you're going to have the bigger gizzard shad can stay out deep for sure because they can actually eat algae basically off of rocks. If there's laydowns, they can eat it off docks, off the bottom. If it's above the thermocline and there's sufficient oxygen for them, they can eat just the actual algae. They don't really have to have the phytoplankton. So the bigger gizzard shad can stay out deeper, but that doesn't mean that the smaller shad are all going to migrate to the backs, because there'd be certain circumstances where you're still going to have good algae blooms out deeper, and there's no need for the bait fish to migrate from say way out here all the way to here if there's an ample amount of food on the main lake. So don't just think, okay, it's fall. I've read everything, I've heard everything about bait fish and how they go shallow and all the bass follow them. Don't just lock yourself into that, because while there is some truth to that, it's not 100%, and you kind of have to think of it from this standpoint. This is how I think of it. So the way I look at it is, in the fall, there's not as much of a biological push for these fish to actually move shallow. In the spring, you have fish that may be deeper in wintering areas, and that they're having a biological instinct that's telling them, hey, we need to push up into somewhere shallow, or get in somewhere protected so we can reproduce, we can spawn. Where in the fall, it's like, okay, time is starting to get a little bit shorter. It's going to be getting colder. Maybe it's time to feed up before it gets colder, but you also have to think that, bass are cold-blooded, so they adapt with their environment. Basically, their metabolism is going to slow down in the winter, so they don't have to eat quite as much as they do in the warmer weather. So it's kind of like a catch-22, but there's definitely not as much of a biological push for them to have to travel to, the back of a creek or up into a shallower area. It's more or less like, let's follow the food. And if there's plenty of food out here where I've been chilling all summer, well, I'm not just going to go, aimlessly travel to where I'm going to have the same results unless you want to. Now, with that being said, fall is a very, very important time to cover water. Keep that in mind. You want to cover water. Now is a good time. It's totally acceptable to have a lot of tackle in your boat and a lot of different things tied on and on the deck. You hear a lot of people talk about junk fishing, saying, I caught some on top water, I caught some on a spinnerbait, I caught some on a jig and brush piles, maybe soft plastics around docks. There's a lot of different things you can do. So basically, just remember that you need to cover water. Now, as far as kind of going into some of the patterns I'm looking for in this late summer, early fall, something I've been doing a lot lately is trying to capitalize on what's left of the bluegill spawn and also some of the bait fish moving back up into these pockets. So we'll use this here as an example. So if I'm pulling up into this creek, the first areas I'm going to look are like back in here, probably go all the way to the back and these side pockets, and I'm going to start flipping these docks either with a jig, a brush hog. If you're there in the morning, you could throw top water, you throw a buzz bait, a whopper plopper, a spook, a lot of different things. But as far as flipping and stuff goes, I'm looking for the shadiest part of the dock. I'm looking to try and put my bait where I think other people can't or they won't. So that's been a good success for me, especially as you get closer to the full moons. You still do have a bluegill spawn going on. Probably be the last one in the year though. I don't foresee one happening in October. The water I think is going to be too cold at that point. So that is kind of going to go away, but that has been very consistent for me, at least in the lower to mid lake area. I did try that up in the river. I didn't have much success, but I also didn't go very far with it. Maybe I just needed to run a few miles one direction or the other, and I could have had better success. So that all falls back to just remember to cover water, even if you're doing something and it's not necessarily working to your liking or working as good as you think it should. Maybe just drive a few miles and try it in a different area and see if you have any better luck. Other things I would look for and patterns I would try and put together this time of the year would maybe be some secondary points, either with brush, or it can be without brush if you have, some nice busted up rock or something. But basically, say you come in here, I want to be graphing these points, looking for brush piles around these docks can be a sweet spot too. If you find some brush behind the walkways here, that'd be a good area to look. But I'm probably going to almost focus towards the back of the creek first and work my way out. You even have a steep bank right here. It's a little bit more of a drop off. Look for brush on there. And things I'm going to throw in there probably be like a shaky head. I might throw like a zoom brush hog or some other type of plastic in there. Jigs. If I'm throwing jigs, maybe having two different sizes would not be a bad idea. Maybe like a smaller 5/16 type jig that maybe fall a little bit slower. Kind of glide around a little more, and then you might try a 1/2 ounce or 5/8 ounce jig that's a little bit heavier, where you get a little bit faster fall, maybe more of a reaction bite. You kind of just gotta feel it out, see how the fish are doing, if you're getting bites or not. If you think, man, this is good brush pile, good location, you've been throwing, say, a bigger jig, you're not getting the bites. Try downsizing, a little bit smaller profile and a little bit lighter, get more of a gliding action, and you might get some more bites. Now, top water is definitely a thing in the fall. I love throwing top water in the fall, but I like to wait till the water cools down a little bit more, maybe into the 60s, mid to low 60s before I really start getting on it, and definitely when it gets in the 50s. I really love throwing the buzz bait, whopper, plopper, and spook, but it's not to say that you can't throw it now when the water is in the 70s, even the low 80s, but I just don't have as much confidence in throwing it all day on that. But you can definitely capitalize on it in the morning. Let's just use this here as an example. I'll use back here. So, if I was gonna come and throw top water like now, the first place I'm gonna go is probably back here into the flats. You're gonna have a bunch of schooling shad back here. You're gonna have bass busting on them and stuff, and keep a top water handy. But I don't know if I necessarily would throw it all day long. Maybe if you have a bit more of an overcast type day, you can get away with throwing it all day long. But I don't have quite the confidence to throw it all day when the water temperature is this warm. But definitely keep one on deck if you see some fish schooling, busting, or whatever. It never hurts to take it, toss it over there. You never know what you might catch. And kind of last but not least, I'll just move down here. So I'm on a different section of the lake. We'll pick on Lynn Creek real fast. But late summer, early fall, your main lake bite's still going on. You still got shad schooled out here, and the bass are on it. So I'm looking for good structure. You can look for bluff ends, steeper channel banks that are on the main lake like this. That's something good you can run down with a swim bait. You throw a shaky head down the wall and kind of let it bounce down. You catch fish doing that. You can find just a good old faithful kind of a more main lake point. You have some over here that are relatively good. These are a little more rounded. This one kind of has a little underwater point that juts out. That'd be something you could kind of zone in on. But basically, you're gonna throw the same things. I'm looking at like swim bait, shaky head. You can still get away with a big crankbait, although I feel like they kind of lose some of their effectiveness later in the summer. I don't know if it's because they've seen so many or what, but if you can crash it into a brush pile or something, that'll help for sure. But basically your main lake staple baits, they're still working this time of the year. Now, as it gets a little further into fall, change it up a little bit more. The water temp gets a little cooler, maybe say into the 60s and mid to low 60s. I feel like the A rig can kind of start to come into play, although I think it starts to shine more in the 50s. Glide baits, they're going to be working. They can probably throw that now and catch them, but maybe as the water cools off a little bit more, your glide bait might be a little better. But just don't forget that there's still fish offshore. Don't get too caught up on just going shallow. But the biggest thing I can tell you during the fall is the fish are going to be scattered, especially now coming out of summer into fall is going to be scattered, and you need to just cover water. Well, now we'll dive into part 2, which would be mid to late fall into early winter even. So as far as this goes, we'll just say kind of start thinking about part 2 when the water temperature gets, say, 60. Maybe even a little lower, like 55-ish, but we'll just say 60 so it's a little easier to remember. But let's roll up here in the gravelway and kind of pick this little area apart. So basically, at that point, you're going to have shad. They're going to be shallow. They've been shallow. People have been back there catching them, top waters, fish been busting. Something you need to start thinking about is as the water temperature is decreasing, you're also going to be accompanied with air temperature that is been decreasing, and you're also going to be at the time of the year that you're going to be getting some potential cold daytime highs and then potentially pretty cold overnight. So when that happens, you have all these fish that are in these shallow flats, and just like how the water warms up very quickly and was very susceptible to getting a nice algae bloom for the shad, this water is going to cool down very quickly. It's basically unstable water. It fluctuates the most compared to this deeper water. So when you get to these shallow, flat areas and it starts to get cooler during the night or during the day and doesn't warm up that much, maybe it's not that sunny, the shad are going to start retreating to these deeper banks. They can go in the guts, like this has the creek bed, so they may just follow the creek bed totally out in here and just sit in the gut, just in the deeper water. Or they may kind of roll over more to this little bit steeper channel bank, even over here if it's deep enough. You need to start thinking of the closest area that has deep water to the flat. So in this case is here. One other big thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a fall turnover at some point. So basically, the fall turnover is you have water temps that are warmer on top. They start to cool. So the upper layer starts to cool off, becomes more dense, and it's going to basically mix in with all of the other water. Instead of having your stratified layer, you get your thermocline and you have your kind of dead zone beneath it, and you have your area above the thermocline. It has all the life in it. It's all basically going to mix together. And some telltale signs of this are watercolors like changing very weird or rapidly, kind of like say you really didn't get any rain or anything that should have like muddied up the water and made the water look really any different. Haven't doing anything with current, and then all of a sudden like the water looks different and fishing's not good. Sometimes it has an odor to it because what's on the bottom is like mixed through and is now on the top or in between, so it's releasing the gases out of it and just smells bad. That is a sign of the lake turning over. So if that happens, drive on out of it, see if you can find a different area where it's not turning over. And it seems like it kind of works its way down the lake all the way to the dam. I think the river turns over sooner than the dam. This is going to be the most stable part of the lake as far as water goes. but it will kind of make its way down. And when it does happen, fishing, like I said, is not really good in the area that it's turned over or turning over in, because it's actually like an environmental change for the fish. Maybe the pH balance or things of the water are changing and it just throws them off. They don't really want to eat. If you can get out of that area into some more stable water, you're going to be a lot better off. As it does cool off, your bait fish that were very shallow are going to start to retreat to the deepest channel bank, and then are out in the gut and start kind of working their way out to a little bit deeper, more stable water where they're basically going to spend the winter. When that time comes, I'm looking at throwing buzz baits a lot. I like throwing the buzz baits when the water gets cool, or whopper plopper. Throwing it along docks, throwing it around rocks that start to hold some heat during the day, or concrete on like walkways. So you got this walkway coming out and you got like a concrete support. You can throw your buzzbait around that, start getting some bites on it. Like I said, the big gizzard shad, like say out here on the main lake, say there's busted up rock here or busted up rock out here. That's on shore. Those bigger gizzard shad will come up when it gets a little bit cooler, and they'll start eating all the algae off of those rocks. And that can be a really good time to start throwing your whopper plopper, buzz bait, any other topwater you want to throw down the edges of that, and you can catch some big old bass doing that. But I'm also going to be putting the A-rig into play. I like throwing the A-rig, or a jerk bait also comes into play. Cannot forget about the jerk bait. You got your jig. You can still, I kind of go to a finesse style once the water gets, I'd say once the water gets below 60, I'm generally starting to pick up a finesse style jig, and I'm going to roll with that all the way until next spring. So the finesse jig is definitely something I like to throw a lot. But as far as like your moving baits go, I'm looking for wind. I like to have some wind blowing in on it if possible. That seems to help. Same thing though, you're basically going to be covering water kind of in that transitionary period, and then as the water temperature does get cooler, you can kind of hone in on their early wintering holes, and then they get a little bit more predictable. The fish aren't so scattered around, but like this would be a great area. This long underwater point that comes out, like look how long this is. It's close to extremely deep water. Has a large flat area up here, kind of another one where it tapers off and then actually drops out a little bit further and then tapers off and stays relatively flat all the way out to the end where it's just a little tip. At this point, it's pretty darn deep, but like out in this region, definitely catchable during the winter. That'd be something you could throw an A-rig on. You could throw a jerk bait over this top portion, especially if there's brush piles or something, or if you somehow you could wait your jerk bait to slow sink deeper depth and throw it deeper. That takes a lot of patience, though. I don't know if I have that much patience. Moving into some other sections of the lake, in the glaze, you're going to have a little bit more color. I like throwing the buzzbait where there's a little bit more color in the water. Definitely a good area I like to spend some time in. You got tons of good coves with creeks, shallow areas back here with the nice creek channel banks that are steep. So that's definitely something I'd keep an eye on. So we'll run down here in the Nangwa real quick. One thing about the Nangwa is you have Haha Tonka coming in, so you've got generally more stable water because this is spring fed here, and then you have the Nangwa River coming in. So this water can sometimes this kind of more into a winter type pattern, I would say, as it gets cooler. But you've got more stable, warm water, and it's generally clear. So if you like that, the Nangwas is a good place to go. Fall is a time to go with your gut. You think you need to go back in the pocket and throw a buzzbait, or you're throwing jigs on secondary points, and you drive by something and you go, ooh, that looks like that would be good to throw a whopper plopper down. Go over there and throw a whopper plopper down it, and you might be surprised. You might catch a 6-pounder. All right, so kind of sum up the fall pattern, hit the keynotes real quick. It would be bait. That's probably one of the bigger things in this is you're going to have a lot of bait transitioning, but don't get too caught up in just fishing shallow next to the bait, because there's still going to be bait that is out deep. So just remember that. Don't abandon the fish completely that are out deep, because they're still there and still catchable and still big. So you have that. You also need to remember to cover water. I'm going to say that again. Cover water And it's okay to have a tackle shop in your boat this time of the year and have a lot of rods rigged up, ready to go, because you don't know what you're going to get into. And don't get frustrated if you come to the lake and everything's not going as well as you planned. Fall can be a tough time of the year. It can be frustrating. You can hit a home run one day and then the next day you totally strike out. As far as the baits go, I'm going to talk about things I've been using now, like late summer, early fall, and then I'll transition into the stuff I'll throw a little bit later in the fall, almost early winter. So first and foremost, what I've been using the most has been a Zoom brush hog. This is the 6-inch version. I like them. They got the appendages, just make a lot of noise, commotion. I dye the tail chartreuse a lot. Use some Spike It dip and dye, and that's basically a bluegill imitator. I normally have been pairing that with either a 3/8 ounce weight or a 3/16. Sometimes you could bump it up to a 1/2 ounce if you want to get a little bit faster fall, but generally I've been sticking with the 3/8 and it's been working pretty well, and I've been pegging the weight. I've had a few people ask me that. Now behind those docks, same areas I'm flipping that, getting all the way up in the shade, as far into the docks as I can go. You can also throw a trick worm or a Senko or really any other plastic that you have confidence in, whether it's like a D-bomb or a beaver style bait. You know, it doesn't really matter. And then of course the classic jig, brown jig. I throw a brown jig a lot, or just a brown with green pumpkin. Like I said, I just tie those myself, but you can also get kind of more of a bluegill imitator jig if you want. This is an Omega jig. It's kind of got the bluegill colors on it, and it's got a rage crawl that I trim down, and sometimes I dye these, just the tips, chartreuse as well. And you can skip this, swim it, do whatever, capitalize out on the bluegill spawn. But same thing, I'm getting that up under there as far as I can go and working it out. Usually when I'm flipping in there, give it just 1 or 2 hops, maybe let it sit for a second, hop it again, and then I'm on to the next flip. A lot of times they're going to eat it on the fall, or it's going to hit the ground, you're going to move it once or twice, and you're going to get the bite. Now as far as the main lake goes, you're basically going to be throwing a swim bait, so like a Kitech. Take your color of choice. I'm usually throwing white or like a bluegill flash or something, or the shad color if it's a little bit cleaner water. Of course, you got the mag trick worm on a shaky head. You can still do a curly tail worm. You can also throw these type of things in and around brush piles. You can do a football jig, just a regular, this is a 1/2 ounce jig. You throw that in brush piles. Deep diving crankbaits, you can still get bit on out in the main lake. That's still working. Glide baits, that's going to be something that's going to be thrown more often as the water starts to cool off a little bit, but you could even be throwing that now and catch some fish on it. Another bait be starting to use a lot more is a spinner bait. You can use, this is a chartreuse and white, gold, silver blade. You can mix and match your blade combos to whatever you want. I'm usually using the willow leaf while it's a little bit warmer water, maybe as it starts to cool off more and gets into like the 50s, you'd maybe transition over to a Colorado blade. With that, you also throw a chatterbait. This is great to swim around the docks, various colors. You can go with white. You can go with more like this is more of like a bluegill imitation color. It's hard to go wrong with a chatterbait. You can skip it. You can put different swim jig trailers on it, all that good stuff. The back of these pockets, creeks, you got a lot of lay down in the shallow docks. Another key component, little square bill here, hooked me, got sharp hooks on there. It's a little sexy shad KVD type square bill, that works good. Here's just another example of a color. It's just a gold, kind of like a shad color. You can throw these around in the backs, just on the flats too, when you have all these bait fish schooled up and you have bass busting on them and stuff. You throw that crankbait in there, you'll catch fish. Something I did not grab out of my boat, so my boat's not at my house right now, is a fluke. A weightless fluke or a fluke with like an 1/8 ounce head. Just throw that out. A lot of times like a spinning reel works good. Throw it out there and just kind of work it like a jerk bait, and you'll catch a lot of those fish that are schooled up out there. Now, as the water gets a little bit cooler, say around the 60-degree mark, I'm really going to start picking up the jerk bait and throwing the jerk bait. So this is just a golden black. These are just a couple I had laying around that actually have broken bills. That's why they're here. This is the old Mega Bass and the Ozark shad color. I really like this jerkbait and like the color of the jerkbait. Of course, if you've watched previous videos, I like the LG Bone color from Mega Bass, which is basically a blue, a little bit translucent sides with a chartreuse belly. I really like that color, or a Table Rock Special color works good. And then as it does get cooler, I really start to like to throw the top water. So I think my favorite bait would be the buzz bait, and you can go with or without the scooter stick. If you like Joe Dirt, you get my reference. But basically, you can put a plastic toad on there if you want, bulk up, change your profile a little bit, or you can just go with the regular old skirt. And then this is a head knocker style buzz bait, so it's gonna clack a lot more. It does have some squeaks too if you want to adjust it. And this is just an old Strike King, one of my favorite old trusty. These just squeak like crazy. So change it up a little bit. You know, if you're using the head knocker style and you're not getting as many bites, maybe don't make it head knock, or change it to a different bait that's going to squeak a lot more and try that. And then the color, as far as that goes, generally people say you want to throw white on a sunnier day, and you want to throw something black or dark on a cloudy day because it contrasts more. But I don't know if I've had much different success using different colors. I think it's mostly what's in your head, what you have confidence in. So you can go with a black toad, black skirt, white skirt. You can go silver blade, you can go gold blade, you can go black blade. There's a lot of different variations there, but you just do what you're comfortable with, have confidence in, and if it's not working and you want to experiment, by all means go experiment. Another good topwater bait would be the old Whopper Plopper. This is the bigger size. This is the 130. I pretty much throw white, or they call it bone from Whopper Plopper, or black, which they call loon. So those are the two primary colors I'm going to throw. They do have another color called monkey butt. That's pretty good. If you a little bit cleaner water area, that'd be a good color. I would equate that more to something I'd use like at Table Rock though, versus like the Ozarks. And then, of course, as it does start to get cooler, back to the jigs. Here's kind of what I was talking about earlier. So here's my normal like half-ounce jig, pitching jig. I'd pair it with a rage crawl, or maybe as the water gets a little bit cooler, just like a regular chunk or something that you can keep the appendages together so it has more of a gliding motion. But I'm also going to throw, like here is... This one, I believe, is a 7/16 ball head that I tie finesse style and kind of trim it. It's got the little shakers here. They're going to give it a little more action without doing much. And then here is a little 5/16 ounce. This is generally what I end up throwing the most, is a little 5/16 ounce. This happens to be an Omega Baby J. Just watermelon red, I think is the color on this one, but caught a ton of big fish on this little baby profile. You can even thin up the skirt a little bit if you want, so it has less volume or bulk appearance to it, and put a really small trailer on it and flip this around and get maybe a slower fall rate or something that glides more. Just really need to experiment. They can kind of get picky, or maybe one day they're going to bite the finesse jig better, but the next day they're going to want the maybe half-ounce jig that's falling a little bit faster. Now there's still plenty of baits I haven't talked about, because honestly, if I want to talk about all of them, the baits you could use, I should just go to my tackle boxes and open up every single box and say, here's the baits you can use. So honestly, you still have lipless crankbaits you can throw. You are going to have like rock crawlers come into play as it gets a little bit cooler water temperature. Your A-rig's going to come into play, just say at 60 degrees and less. Your spinner baits with different blade combinations, like more of the Colorado style blades, a little more thump in action, that's going to come into play. Basically, as the water cools down and the fish start to get a little bit closer to their winter patterns, then you're really going to start relying more on jerk baits, A-rigs, maybe cranking really slow, or spinner baits really slow, or throwing jigs on the channel banks or things close to deep water. So hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more about fall fishing at Lake the Ozarks. I know it can seem a little bit hectic and not quite as systematic as other times of the year, but when they're in like a transition where they don't necessarily have to move, they can sometimes be a little bit tough to catch and just scattered and seem kind of random. So just do your best to try and make something happen, and build on a pattern, but don't be discouraged if it's working one day and it's not working the next. And if you see me at the lake or something and you see my boat and you go, man, he's got like 9 rods out, like he doesn't know what he's going to be doing that day. Well, there's a good chance I don't exactly know what I'm going to be doing that day. I might be flipping docks, I might be fishing deep, might be throwing top water, might be throwing a jerk bait, I might be doing a little bit of everything. So I'm not afraid to admit it that, you know, things are changing, and sometimes you get to run around this time of the year like a chicken with your head cut off and trying different things and piecing the puzzle together. So hopefully that helped you. Maybe some of the people that are fishing the big bass bash here soon, this will help you out a little bit. I am unfortunately not going to be able to fish it this year, but I'm going to try and put a video out, I think a few days before, kind of what I would do or how I would approach it, and maybe they can help someone cash some checks. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll get some more videos out for you.